Hey everyone, this class we're going to do a little bit of a review. We still have one big thing to learn in SQL, and that's joining tables. But I wanted to take this class to go over our select from where, group by, and order by lines, as well as the update formulas, and also get in a few math in our queries as well, so averages and sums. And then the next couple classes we'll do the joining tables, and we're close to wrapping up SQL after that. But I posted a CSV file called overtime, so let's check that out to begin with. I'm going to navigate to it now and see the file that we're going to be looking at. And we may have used this earlier in the year, I forget honestly, for Excel. But this is data that the observer got, and we actually used it for a story. And what it shows is the amount of overtime that area employees, public employees, received for, I believe it was 2017. And let's go over the fields. And like we always do, let's change the number fields as numbers and save it so we can import it properly. So we have a first, middle, and last name as well as suffix, the department that the person worked in, his or her position, his or her salary, the amount of overtime he or she was paid, and I created this field, date recorded, just for practice. So it's a pretty simple data set. I'm going to scroll down to get a rough idea of how many records that we have, and it looks like we have give or take 8,000 records or so. But this is overtime pay and salary pay for area public employees. So what I'm going to do is save the salary and the overtime. Right now it's in a general format. Let's change that to number because we'll want to do some math in SQL. And let's get rid of the trailing zeros as well. And I'm going to scroll back through my data just to make sure there's no other numbers. Nope, that's it. Click Save. And as you always do, let's make a copy of this data just in case we screw something up. We'll have the original as is. So that's saved. Close it out and open up DB Browser for SQLite. Okay, here I go to open up DB Browser for SQLite. And like usual, I'm going to create a new database and then a new table. Navigate to where I want it and call it just overtime. Click Save, and my table I'm also going to call overtime. So we have a new database called overtime and a new table called overtime. Now we have to add our fields. And if you didn't copy them down or take a picture, maybe you can do a split screen to get all the fields and the proper names and formats. So I'm going to add the fields right now, and the first one was first name, and that was an integer. I'm sorry, that was a text. Then it was middle name. That was a text. Then last name. Text as well. Then suffix. Text. Then we had department and position. Text. Position. Text. Then salary, overtime, and date recorded. So salary was an integer, going to keep that just as is. Overtime was also an integer, I'm going to keep that. And date reported was a text, so I'm going to keep that as a text. So there are our fields. Everything looks good to me. I'm going to click OK and create the blank shell. Here it is for our data that we're going to import. There's our data. And let's go back to database structure, file, import from CSV. And go grab the overtime data. And let's see if it imports properly. Table name is great. First column are the headers, great. Field separated by comma, great. And click OK. Yes, I want to replace it. And done. Let's browse it. And there we go. You see suffix are mostly nulls. That's fine. And we have our salary, our overtime, and our date reported. Perfect. Now let's clean it up a little bit. How about? Now what do I mean when I say clean it up? Because the data actually looks pretty good. Well, for our purposes, when I say clean it up, I'm thinking, okay, let's concatenate the names, number one. Two, maybe we want to set up a field, like a salary category field, where we can essentially write an if-then statement, which would be in a Excel, or an update statement in SQL to say, okay, someone made less than $10,000 or between $10,000 and $20,000 in overtime, or more than $20,000. So that could be another field. And the last one, and this would be more for just practice, is to create a year reported field. And as you can see, the years are all 2017. So this is totally unnecessary, but I do want to get into practice of breaking out dates, because that's a key function in SQL. So with those three in mind, the full name, the salary category, and the year reported, let's go back to your database structure and let's add those three new fields. And the way to add field is go to database structure, click on overtime, then click modify table. It'll ask you, do you want to save everything as of now? Click yes. And then here we are, back to our table where we can create a field and change the format. So add a field and let's call the first one full name. Full underscore name. And names, of course, are text. Add a new field called salary category. And in this case, we're going to keep this as a text because this is going to say, more than $10,000, less than $10,000, more than $20,000, etc. So it's not going to be a dollar sign. It's going to be words. So that's a text. Then we need another field. Let's call this year reported. And years are text. They're not numbers. And the last one, if you remember when we updated a year in the previous lesson, we also needed a length field. And that's sort of a throwaway field, but in order for us to determine the year, we need the length. So I'm going to add one more. I'm going to call it length, and I'm going to keep this as an integer. So the four new fields that we added: full name as a text, salary category as a text, year reported as a text, and length as an integer. Click OK, then click Browse Data. And here are our new fields over here. Okay. First things first, let's concatenate the first, middle, last, and suffix fields into the full name field. So if you can do that on your own, click pause and run that query. If you want to check your work, then hit play, and I'm going to walk you through right now how to run that update query. Remember, we go to Execute SQL, and we create a blank SQL tab. The concatenate formula in SQL doesn't start with select and from. It starts with update, because we want to modify our data. And what do we want to modify? The table. And of course, the table name is overtime. Now we go on to set. What do we want to set? We want to set our new field, which is called full underscore name. And we want that to equal first name. And rather than the ampersand like you use in Excel, we're going to use the double pipe. Shift and then the button right above the enter key for 2 pipes. Then of course it's quote unquote, spaces, and 2 more pipes. Then middle name. Same thing, pipes, quote unquote, pipes. Last name, pipes, quote unquote, pipes, and of course, suffix. So right now we have update overtime, so update our table, set our new column called full name equals first name, pipes, quotes, pipes, middle name, pipes, quotes, pipes, last name, pipes, quotes, pipes, and then suffix. Now, I think the formula is written correctly, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get an error. And it's not anything that we've done, but it's something, it's a little hiccup in SQLite. And watch, when we get an error, we're going to run it. Okay, it says all 8,863 rows ran fine. But let's browse our data. Look at that. I know we wrote our concatenate formula, right? But these are all nulls until we get down to Keisha V. Smith Jr. Now the problem with SQLite is when it saw a null in any of these fields, like middle name or suffix, it didn't allow our query to run. See, the one that it did run, first, middle, last, and suffix, were all populated. Let's scroll down to see if we can find another one where it may have run. Oops, I just passed one. Trying to scroll back up to find it. There we go. Eric Williams Moore II. See, they all ran, but of course, these nulls are blocking our query from running. Again, that's a hiccup in SQLite. Other database managers don't do that. So I'm kind of brainstorming how we might be able to get around this. So I'm going to go back to Execute SQL, and I'm going to create a new tab, and I'm going to update our data. And wherever there's a null, meaning no data in there, I'm just going to put a space. So update our table name, which is called overtime. Set, now our first names were fine, and our last names were fine, because everyone had a first and last name. Not everyone had a middle name. So set middle name equals quote space quote. So I'm just saying put a blank where the middle name is. But I don't want to do that all the time. I only want to do it where middle name is null. Remember our null query that we ran before? So essentially we're not selecting out all nulls, but we're saying where there's a null in the middle name, where the middle name is completely blank of data, just put a blank space right there. So let's try running this, and we're going to try this to the suffix, and we're going to see if this fixes our concatenate formula. I'm going to run. Okay, so 1100 rows were affected. I'm going to browse data, and right now, see there's no null right here. I'm going to scroll down. There's no null right here. It's just a blank space. I'm going to do the same thing to suffix. So set suffix, get rid of my middle name, set suffix equals single quote blank single quote, where suffix is null. Okay, does everyone get that? So update overtime, set suffix as just a blank, where suffix is null, meaning where there's no data in that field. Let's run that, and let's check out our data by browse data. There we go. Now, like I said, first and middle names are done. Last name, I doubt would have any blanks. At least I don't see any nulls as I'm scrolling down. And this is what you just sort of have to do when you're working with data. You just sort of have to work on the fly. Why my query didn't work, then sort of work backwards and find out why. And honestly, this is the first time that I've ever had to do this, but I think it'll work now. So I'll go back to execute SQL. Go back to your concatenate formula that you should have in another tab. So again, it's update overtime, set full name equals first, middle, last, and suffix. Now that none of them are null, I think they'll actually run. So let's try it. Okay, 8,863 rows were affected. Let's cross our fingers. Browse data, here we go. There are all our names. The one thing that I may change later on, we don't have to in this class, but there's 2 spaces between J and Blair. I'd get rid of those 2 spaces by doing the same thing. Update full name and set a single space wherever I find a double space. But that's fine. We can live with this for now. And we found out a little workaround. You know, I learned it just as you learned it, you guys. Perfect. So that's the full name. Let's check out the overtime, because we want to create an overtime category right here. Uh-oh, I just noticed something. I don't want that to be salary category, that field we created. I want it to be called overtime category, since we're investigating how much people are paid overtime. So I'm going to change that real quick and go to database structure, overtime, modify table, yes, save my updates to it, and scroll down to salary category, double click on it, and type in, instead of salary, overtime. So overtime category instead of salary category. There we go. I clicked OK. Now back up to browse data. And you can see this is overtime. Oh, I didn't spell it right, but that'll be overtime instead of salary. And that'll make more sense because we're gonna, let's spell it right, because we're investigating how much people are paid in overtime and not how much they're paid by salary. Okay, so let's fill that out. If someone made less than $10,000 in overtime, write $10,000 here, or write less than $10,000 here. If someone made between $10,000 and $20,000, write between $10,000 and $20,000 here. If someone made more than $20,000, write more than $20,000 there. Does that make sense? We'll try the first one together. Execute SQL and create a new SQL tab. So update what? Update our table called overtime. Set our new field called overtime category, there it is, equals, and I want it less than $1,000. So that'll be the first category. Single quote, less than $1,000. Now we need a where line, right? Because we don't want to update all of them to less than $1,000. We need where overtime is less than 1,000. Let's review that real quick. Update overtime, so update our table. Set overtime category as quote unquote less than $1,000, where overtime is less than 1,000. Again, no quotes around the 1,000 in our where line and no commas. Okay, let's run that. And it looks like it was affected, 5,000 rows or so. Browse data. And less than $1,000. Let's scroll down until we get a couple blanks. And there they are. So these are nulls, and you can see that this person made $28,000. Okay, let's update the rest. So we did less than 1,000. Now let's do between 1,000 and 10,000. Between 1,000 and 10,000. Got that? Okay, this where is going to get a little tricky, so let's think about how we want to write it. Because we don't want just greater than 1,000, we want between 1,000 and $10,000. Okay, so we want overtime greater than, so flip-flop the less than to greater than $1,000, right? That's the first half of our where line. And we need the word and. And overtime in this case, less than $10,000. I think this will run. So set our overtime category as between 1,000 and 10,000, where overtime is greater than 1 and overtime is less than 10. Let's try that. Run it. Looks like 2,700 rows were affected. Let's browse our data. Scrolling down, these are all less thans. Okay, here we go. This person made $6,000 in overtime, and of course that's between $1,000 and $10,000. Makes sense. We're just kind of thinking on the fly. These are little problems that we have to solve using our SQL lines, and we're getting there. Now let's do two more, and we can modify these. So let's say overtime is greater than 10,000, so I'm going to add another 0, but less than 20,000. I'm going to change these as well, between 10,000 and 20,000. So this one I have set overtime category between 10,000 and 20,000, where overtime is greater than 10,000 and overtime is less than 20,000. Okay, let's run that one. Click down here, run it. Looks like 400 rows were affected, so fewer people. And I'm going to browse the data and scroll all the way down. Between 1 and 10, why don't I sort the data? Overtime category. I just want to make sure that my data filled in between 1 and 10, between 10 and 20, right here. And this person made $11,000. Okay, I'm just fact checking myself. And the last one, I'm going to say more than $20,000. More than 20,000. Or overtime. There we go. So the final one, set overtime category as quote unquote more than $20,000, where overtime greater than 20,000. Let's run that. 149 rows were affected, and this should be the last of our data. Browse. Oh, perfect. These people made $1,000 exactly. So I'm going to fill them in as well, but I think they should be the only ones. And what you can do right here is we can just type in $1,000. I'm going to put made $1,000 because it's a text. Click apply. And then I'm going to X that out. And you can see my made $1,000 right there. I'm going to do the same thing right there since it's only 2 records. Double click on it. Made $1,000. Apply. Then exit out. Get back to my name. There we go. That's an update query. And this will help us run query to better analyze our data. And the final one that we want to do, probably the most complicated, is getting these years broken apart. Remember that we don't have a year or a write formula in SQLite, so we're going to have to run a substring formula, but before that, we have to grab the length of the date reported field. So let's do. Remember, you'll have cheat sheets for all this that'll sort of spell out how to write the queries. So don't worry and stress out about memorizing them all, but we're just getting some practice in right now. So I'm going to create a new tab. I'm going to update our table name, which is overtime. I'm going to set my length field equals the length function and the field name, date underscore reported. So update overtime, set length equals length, parentheses, date reported, close parentheses. Let's run that. Error. Let me see what I did wrong here. Oh, I see. Right here. I misspelled overtime. It said no such table as overtime. Need to add the T. Set overtime. Now I can run it. And we'll see what we get. Okay, looks like all our rows were affected. Browse data. And there's our length. Okay, we'll need that for our substring queries that we'll write. Now let's review the substring queries. Okay, I am going to create a new tab. And our substring queries start like any other update query. So update table name. Update overtime. Then set our new field. In this case, it was year reported equals, then substring, SUB, STR, and you can see how SQL automatically populates it for you. Then we want to Shift 9 to open the parentheses, and we want substring of what? Our original date reported field. So date reported. Then the next part after the comma is where we want our character count essentially to start. Do you want it to start X number of places over? So in this case, we're going to start 9 places over because some dates are 9 character lengths. So if you had like let me go back to the data, maybe I can pick one out for 9. Our first one, we have 12, so that's 2 characters, a backslash, that's 3, a 1, that's 4, a backslash is 5, and then a 2017 is 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we're going to start at the 9 character over on this one. And the next number that we write is how many spaces we want to grab. And we're just going to grab the year, so we're going to type in a 4. But we want to go backwards 4 because we're counting backwards to the left, so we need to make that a -4. So we have set year reported equals the substring function, then our field, date reported, then a comma, and the number of character we want to start at, in this case it's 9, then -4. And in this case, we need to say where year reported equals 8. Because these lengths we want to start at the 9th character over, which will be past the 2017, and there would be only 8 characters in those types of fields. Let's run it and see if we get some good results, and I'll explain it to you. Run. Uh-oh, it said 0 rows affected, and I see why, because I have year reported equals 8. So I want to say where length equals 8. So where length equals 8. Now let's run it. Okay, that makes more sense. 4,500 rows. Let's browse our data. You can see the 2017 starting to pop up, and they're popping up where length equals 8. So in this case, we have 9/9, so that's 3. 4 would be the backslash. 5, 6, 7, 8 would be the year. Then we're going to start at the 9th character after 2017 and go back 8, or go back 4. Does that make sense? And again, the cheat sheet will help with all this. And these will just bump up. So the next one is going to be start at 10, where the length was 9. Let's run it. And then start at 11, where the length was 10, and run it. Now let's browse our data. And 2017 should be filled in for all the records. And I know this is one of the more complicated formulas that we have. Don't worry, you're going to get the SQL tricks sheet that'll have this step-by-step written down. But I think as far as cleaning our data, that's pretty much it. You know, we concatenated the full name, we added a pretty complicated overtime category, and we broke out the year, which was mainly for practice. Now we can start asking the data questions. So question number 1. How much overtime did each department pay to employees, and how many employees did it pay overtime to? So how much overtime did each department pay, right here, and how many employees got overtime? Now you can knock out both those questions with one query. So how much total overtime did each department pay, and how many employees got it? Let's go to Execute SQL, create a new tab. Now we're pulling information from our data, so we don't want to use the update lines, we want to use the select. Select, what do we want to select? Department. Now we're looking for how much total overtime did each department pay, and how many employees did it pay to. So total overtime should scream out the sum function. So select department, comma, sum overtime, just like that. Then we need to rename this column, right? As, I'm going to call it total overtime. You can call it whatever you want. Total overtime makes sense to me. Then we need to find out how many employees got this overtime, or were part of this. And that's our good friend, the count, with the asterisk in the middle. So we're counting all the records. We need to rename this as, I'm just going to call it num records. So we have select department, sum overtime, call that new sum total overtime, then count how many employees were getting overtime that year. From our table called overtime, and because we have a field in our select line, we also need it in our group by line. Group by department. We don't need the sum or the count because they are fields that we created. They're not original fields in our data, so we leave them out of the group by line. But let's order it by, let's say, 2 descending. So I'm going to order it by sum of overtime descending. Does that look good to you guys? You see what we have? Let's try running it. And there we go. So Mecklenburg County as a whole paid the most overtime. And it looks like at $8 million. And they have around 5,193 total employees. Look at EMS though. They paid a ton of overtime too, more than 4 million, and they have a lot fewer employees. So I'd almost write a sentence like that, saying EMS paid more than $4 million in overtime to some 570 employees. You know, that's that would stand out to me. I'm going to save this query as OT by department. There we go. Click save. And let's try another one, but that one's good. We cast a wide net on our first one where we looked at all departments. So let me think of another question that we could ask our data. So we found the total overtime by department. What about the average overtime by department? Now I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to take my query that I just saved and uncopy it. I'm going to create a new tab. I'm going to paste it in. So I have select department, and then if I want to find the average, let's swap out the average instead of sum. And then instead of total overtime, let's call that average overtime. And then everything else should stay the same, right? I'm still looking at departments, so I still have it in my group by line. And I'm still going to count my records, and it's still from our main table. Okay, let's run this one. There we go. We have average overtime. Look at this. Specialist electronic fire alarms. 4 total employees made an average of $42,000. Wow, that's quite a bit. But you see a lot of these just have one person. And that's why I like doing counts. Because $20,000 on average sounds like a heck of a lot, and it is. But it's different if just one person made it. Let's scroll down to Mecklenburg County EMS since they jumped out to begin with. You can see they average around $8,500. So maybe I'd include that in my sentence, saying on average, Mecklenburg County EMS workers made $8,500 in overtime in 2017. Okay, let's save this query as OT by department average. Saved. Okay, let's ask the data something else. Let's go back at our main data. And since we created that field called overtime category, let's write a query to find out how many employees made each of these different categories. So how many employees made less than $1,000 in overtime, how many made between $10,000 and $20,000, how many made more than $20,000, etc. So if you can do that with a select and a group by query, hit pause and try to run it. And I'm going to outline it right here, and you can check your answer. So I'm going to create a new tab, and I'm interested in the overtime category field. So start with select, overtime category, and then we want to find out how many employees fell into each category. So what we want to do, we want to count them and rename it, and my go-to is number records. Then from our table called overtime, and because we have a field in our select line, we also need it in our group by line. And I'm going to order it by to descending, like usual. So I select our field called overtime category, count, the number of people who fell within that category and change that field to a number record header from overtime, group by overtime category, order by 2 descending. Let's run that. There we go. That's our little pivot table that we just created. So in this case, the big one was more than $20,000. You know, we're journalists, we're in the communications business. That jumps out to me the most, saying that nearly 150 people earned more than $20,000 in overtime in a single year. That's a lot of money in OT. So I'd write that down as a sentence. And I'm going to save this query as something like overtime category count. OT category count. You might have your own way to name things and save things, and anything is fine as long as you know when you open up the view again or the query what you're looking at. So that's saved. Let's ask the data something else. Now what if I wanted to drill down on all those 149 people? And I wanted to write a query that selects all people who made more than $20,000 just to investigate them a little bit. How would you do that? Now there's 2 different ways you can do that. You'd select all records in both of them. One, you could be select all records where the overtime category equals more than 20,000, or you could use the raw overtime number and you go where the overtime is greater than 20,000. So either way is fine. Since we created this overtime category, I'm going to put used to it. So I'm going to create a new SQL tab, and I want to select all records where people made more than $20,000 in overtime. Select all from overtime, where overtime category in this case equals, then we had more than 20,000, and remember this is case sensitive, so the M has to be capitalized. So select all records from our table where overtime category equals more than $20,000. And I'm gonna, for the heck of it, I'm gonna order it by the department because we've been interested in county EMS. Order by department. Let's run that. There we go. You see how we're sort of fact checking ourselves because there's 149 right down there, and that was what was in our sort of pivot table query that we ran. And these are ordered by department. So you have a middle school, building services, and then you go down to Mecklenburg County, and then EMS. You can also order it by overtime, just to see who made the most overtime. So I'm going to do that. Overtime descending. Right? And I'm going to run that. There we go. Wow. Someone made $54,000 in overtime. $53,000. So you could say something like that, and in fact, look, some of the big earners were actually from EMS. So you can say that, let me see, there's 9 records there. So 9 people made more than $45,000 in overtime in 2017, including 3, 1, 2, 3, who work for Mecklenburg County EMS. I'd write something like that down. Now let's save this query as OT more than 20,000. OT more than 20,000. Now do this. Write a query that queries the view that we just saved, OT more than 20,000. And write a query that counts how many people in each department made more than $20,000 in overtime based off the query that we just wrote. Does that make sense? So I'm going to create a new SQL tab. I'm going to select department. I'm going to count it like usual as num records. Now this is the case that I want to change from OT more than 20,000. So I'm querying the query that we just wrote. Group by department and order by to descending. So this says grab all the departments and count how many people are in each department from our view called overtime more than $20,000. So that's essentially from our filter, because we filtered out people who made more than $20,000. And then group it by department because department's in our select line, and order it by to descending. Let's run that. Oh, num records. Let's change that 1 second. And what I have to change is I have AA instead of as. Now I can run it. There we go. Look at that. 40 EMS employees made more than $20,000 in overtime. Now Mecklenburg County had a lot more, but remember their employee count was I think 5,000 or so, and there was only a couple hundred EMS. So I'd write that down. 40 employees with Mecklenburg County EMS made more than $20,000 in overtime in 2017. Now let's save this one as OT more than 20,000, because that's the table that we queried, by department. OT more than 20,000 by department. Now the last thing that I want to do, the last query that I want to write, is I want to find out all the people who made more overtime than they did salary. See this gentleman right here, Hoabui, if that's how I pronounce her name, or his name, made $49,900 in overtime. And the salary was actually $49,300. So he or she made more overtime dollars than actually salary dollars. Same thing with the next person, Robert Michael Hartford. Made $49,000 in overtime, but his pay is only $37,000. So write a query that grabs just the people who made more overtime than salary. Let's think about how to do that. Go to Execute SQL and create a new tab. So we want to select all records, right? And we want it to be from our table called overtime. Okay, we got the easy part out of the way. Now we need a where, because we're filtering out records. Where we want all records where overtime pay is essentially greater than salary pay. So just write that, where overtime, OVER time, is greater than salary. I think this should work. Let me go back to my data just to make sure. Overtime greater than salary. This should work if we run it, but let's see. Okay, I get some responses back. Now let's fact check ourselves. Overtime, 49.9, 49.3, 49, 37, 39, 37, 36, 36. And it looks like we only have 9 people total. I'm going to widen this down to see if I can get all 9. And 3 of them, it looks like 1, 2, 3 are EMS. So I'd say that 3 Mecklenburg County EMS workers more than doubled their salary with overtime. So I'm going to save this as OT more than salary. OT more than salary. And there we have it. Well, we stuffed a lot of work into today, with importing the data, cleaning it up with adding the new fields, full name, overtime category, year reported, and length, and then writing maybe a half dozen queries to ask our data questions. And what did we come up with? How about something like this? Roughly 570 Mecklenburg County EMS employees raked in a total of, let me change that, more than $4.8 million in overtime in 2017 data show. On average, each worker made $8,500. Nearly 150 county employees made more than $20,000 in overtime that year. 9 people made more than $45,000 in overtime, including 3 who worked for EMS. 40 Mecklenburg EMS workers made more than $20,000, records show. 3 EMS employees more than doubled their salaries by working overtime. Robert Michael Hartford had an annual salary of $38,000, but brought home an additional $49,500 in overtime, the Observer found. Not bad. That's the basis to a story. In fact, it's a story that the Observer did not too long ago, looking at this data, writing essentially these queries. Now your homework. Imagine that you're at a news agency and you're writing a story based on the data that we just reviewed. Your story concentrates on EMS employees working an excessive amount of overtime, like we saw. Who are 3 people, either faces or experts, you'd want to interview, and why? You can, but you don't have to, include specific names. For instance, you can simply say, I'd like to interview the head of the local county employees union, and give me a one-sentence why.